Good morning, afternoon, or evening to everybody out there. This is Malcolm Hawker. I am your host for CDO Matters Live. Thank you for joining us here online. Thank you for tuning in on YouTube or on LinkedIn or in any other channel where you may be consuming this content. It's Friday after a long week. I've been at myself and my guest, who I'll introduce very, very shortly, the esteemed Mr. Reed Gusmus. We're both at a company kickoff meeting this week in Atlanta at our headquarters, at our global headquarters in Atlanta. It was a good time had by all, but as always with these things, they can be fairly draining. So I'm amping it up here. I'm trying to pump it up and get ready for a great conversation here today about data literacy, a great conversation about a whole bunch of other topics. But about anything that you want to talk about, questions that you have about best practices, questions you have about MDM, data strategy, data governance, you name it, this time is largely for you. We will let folks kind of dribble in here slowly over the next couple of minutes. Just a reminder to everybody, there are multiple ways that you can ask questions. So I'll spend the first 10, 15, 20 minutes, maybe longer, depending on how I go into my rants. And then we'll reserve the second half or the latter 2/3 of the meeting to questions from you. There are lots of ways to ask questions. If you are joining us on the Goldcast platform, over on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see a chat function. You can drop some questions in there. You'll see a Q&A function. You can drop questions in there. And even when you do that, you can actually raise your hand and we can even pull you on the stage. So if you're feeling outgoing today, here on a Friday, acknowledging you may be watching a recorded version of this, but for us, it's a Friday. If you want to raise your hand, we can pull you on the stage and have a face-to-face conversation. As I mentioned, I'm joined today by the Chief Marketing Officer of Prophecy Software, Reed Gusmus. Wonderful guy, happens to be my boss, actually happens to be in the same fraternity as me. This is something that we learned after the hiring process, actually, which turned out to be kind of cool. You know, we can go around and give each other secret handshakes that nobody else knows about. Glad you could be here today with us, Reed.
Yeah, hey, great to be here. What an honor to be here. I'll say this is an awesome event that we do, and Malcolm, you just do an incredible job here, and I continue to get so much great feedback from the data community about this event in general, our customers, our partners, in general. So it's great to be here, and it's awesome. Yeah, the fraternity thing surprised me initially. Yeah. And I tell you what, I haven't thrown the secret handshake in probably a decade. And they have that silly kind of stuff, but it just made the deal much more sweeter, right?
There you go.
Bringing you here, so it's fantastic.
Glad I could join. It's been a great 10 months. I can't believe it's only been, well, it seems like it's been a long time, but it seems like it was just yesterday. I guess that's kind of how things go in our world today of constant disruption. Whether it is disruption at work or disruption at home or pandemics or whatever it is, the time just seems to be warped. I don't know. It's, at least for me, I don't know if it's the same for everybody out there, but the time has kind of whizzed by. But it's been great. I've loved joining Prophecy. I've loved having these channels, right? When I was at Gartner, I was really boxed in. Right. I would have my conversations every day with data and analytics leaders, and it was great. They call those inquiries. So I would have 5 of those inquiries a day where I would talk to CDOs or CIOs, and it was great. And I got a chance to write a whole bunch of research and Magic Quadrant documents, and all that is great. But those were really kind of the only swim lanes that I had, as it were, the written research or those inquiries. And now with Prophecy, it's just so awesome because I can do things like this. I can be really active on LinkedIn. I can be writing blogs. I can be speaking at events, and multiple events, not just, the Gartner events, of course, which we are actually sponsoring an upcoming event where I'll get to speak a little bit the third week of March in Orlando. But it's just been so great being with Prophecy and being able to share everything that I know over a 30-year career of data and analytics. And I think that's kind of maybe what is resonating out there. Just kind of me sharing what I know and kind of breaking that paywall, as it were, with Gartner. And that's all thanks to the investment that Prophecy is making in the data and analytics community writ large. Not just me, but into the community as a whole. And that's largely a function of you, Reed. So thanks for that.
Yeah, well, I don't need credit, but really, this is about the community, right? Yep. Providing expertise, thought leadership, perspectives, feedback be an active and valuable member to the community, and that's why you're here, right? And you do a tremendous job at it. And you know, the other thing that makes this so special in my mind is that everything's unbiased from your perspective, right? You're not here to talk about prophecy. You're here to talk about the problems and challenges in the data community. And I think that's what really adds value to what it is you do here. And we'd like to continue to see that happen. So it's phenomenal. So this is good.
Yeah. Nobody wants to be sold, right?
No.
Yeah. Well, at least not in today's days and times, and maybe they ultimately do, but that's not what this is about. We're not here to sell. We're here to help the data and analytics community evolve and grow and get value from data, however you may be consuming that data. So I interrupted you, Reed. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. That's great. And speaking of the community, you know, why don't I kick it off here? Let's get into some of this. I have a couple of topics for today that you and I have talked about. Some we've been thinking about. I hear a lot on LinkedIn about in particular. And by the way, a lot of our topics and the things that you speak of, they come from the engagement in the community, right? The community themes, you know, kind of the top of mind subject matters that you focus on day in and day out. One of them is data literacy, right? So Malcolm, looking at one of your LinkedIn posts a little while ago, and actually in one of your most recent Forbes articles, you talked about data literacy and the problem with data literacy, particularly that it puts the onus of understanding it and communicating it and the value of it on the business and not the data leader, whether it's a CDO or the IT leader. Talk a little more about that, because that just doesn't seem like it foots well, and it definitely could.
Yeah. So first, a couple of disclaimers. First, I'm all for having an empowered, knowledgeable staff, right? I'm all for having people who know how to use data. It's important. It's critically important. So that must be said. What also must be said is that there are a lot of people who believe passionately in data literacy. And I fervently believe that those people, including somebody I quoted in my article, a gentleman named Jordan Morrow, who is just rock solid as a human being and really, really cares about the data and analytics community and is really trying to advance the data and analytics community. So there are people who believe fervently in data literacy, and I believe in my heart that they are helping and that they are pushing us all forward. And these are very, very good things. However, as with all things that are being hyped, whether that is technology, whether that is a program like data literacy, whether that has a new architecture like the data mesh, when things get really, really hyped, there can be some negatives that go along with those extremely hyped things in our data world, and we frankly like to hype things. And I wanted to point out some of the things and some of the problems that I saw with data literacy. So again, I'm not against data literacy per se. I have some concerns about the phrase itself. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But this is really, really hyped. And there are some cautionary things I think the data and analytics leaders need to be aware of if they're thinking about data literacy, if they are looking at maybe implementing some form of a data literacy program, and maybe they're already knee deep in one. That's fine. So let's start first with a definition of data literacy, because I think that's important. Let's set the baseline here. I'm all about semantics. Being in the data space, you kind of have to be. And I'll use Gartner's definition because, well, I used to work at Gartner, and they're as good as any when it comes to this kind of stuff, right? So I'm going to read it here word for word. Gartner defines data literacy as the ability to read, write, and communicate data in context. Okay, so far so good. With an understanding of the data sources and constructs, analytical methods and techniques applied. Red flag. That last bit, to me, that's a bit of a red flag, right? So with an understanding of the data sources and constructs, analytical methods and techniques applied. And it ends kind of strong. And the ability to describe the use case application and resulting business value or outcome of that data, right? So when I look at data literacy, I see there being really kind of three problems here. The first one is too much of a focus on what Gartner calls the sources, constructs, analytical methods, and techniques could be problematic. And in my Forbes article, that I would certainly welcome everybody to read. It's relatively short. It's only about 1,000 words. It's not a very dense read. In my Forbes article, what I highlight here is that if you focus too much on that stuff, it could be a drag. It can actually be negative. And by that stuff, what I mean is constructs, analytical methods, and techniques, particularly methods and techniques. A metaphor in that Forbes article I use is one of a hammer. Really scientific stuff here. You need to know, right, that a hammer is the best tool for putting a nail through a piece of wood, right? Or to affixing two pieces of wood together. You've got a nail, a hammer. Hey, that's the best tool for the job. That's what I see as important with data literacy. What's the best tool for the job? But if you spend a lot of time understanding how a hammer is made, why? What's the point? Why do I need to know how the hammer is made to understand that it's the best tool for the job? So I see a lot of data and analytics leaders out there say, oh, well, data literacy, that means I need to go tell people about how ETL works and how data transformations work, and data quality rules and all sorts of other things. And I would say, no, you don't need to do that. And if you spend too much time, you'll probably end up doing more harm than good, because the business users, the people who are using data, really, really need to know in depth the constructs, analytical methods, and techniques for creating the data. I would argue the answer here is absolutely not, particularly if you do data, for lack of a better word, well. Right? If your dashboards are intuitive, if your data related processes are intuitive and are deeply interwoven and deeply integrated business processes, do you need to spend a lot of time explaining how the data got there? I would argue that's number one concern that I've got with data literacy. So that's one of three. Don't spend too much time talking about methods and techniques, because I would argue your end users really don't need to. And if you go too far down that path, you're going to negatively impact productivity, because you're going to be training people whose job it is to swing a hammer on how hammers get made. Yeah. And they don't need to know how the hammer gets made.
Just TMI, opinion. Right? It's just TMI.
Yeah. TMI. Now I understand that there's probably a fine line there, right? And all the companies will have to figure that out. But the cautionary tale here is do you need to drag people into training of how report systems work, or how you built a data science model, or data quality processes, or MDM processes, for heaven's sake? Sometimes this stuff can get fairly complicated. And I would argue that if you are putting the user first, if you are solving a business problem first and foremost, then a focus on methods and techniques is probably overkill. Yep. So that's problem number one. Problem number two. I really, at the core, based on the description and the definition that I share, at the core, what data literacy is a training program. It in essence is a training program. However, when you dive into the data literacy literature, including a book by the aforementioned Jordan Morrow and many other books, what you will see is this assumption that data consumers, people who are using data, are struggling to get value from data because they don't understand enough about data, that they don't have enough skills, they don't have enough training related to data. So there's an underlying assumption that is within the kind of the data literacy community, that the key driver here, the key barrier that are holding people back from getting value from data, is a skills gap. We don't have the skills to leverage the data in order to get value from it. This is a problem, I would argue. This belief that the root cause, or a significant cause, not just the only cause, but a significant cause of an inability to get value from data, is because the users lack skills in data. That's a red flag to me. And it's a real, go ahead.
Yeah. It's just toxic for the organization, right?
Well, it can be, right? Because if you as a data leader assume that people aren't using reports, or aren't using the tools, or aren't asking you for more reports or more insights or more analytics, or they're not getting any value from MDM, or they're not getting any value from a governance program, if you assume that the main reason here is because of their lack of skills, that's problematic. Yeah. And I would argue that's problematic because what it does is it pivots everything from a problem that could be related to the product itself, and puts the problem and the onus and the responsibility really on the users. And this is what you were saying, Reed, which is, hey, the business isn't getting any benefit from data because the business users lack skills. They lack literacy. And I think this is a huge problem, because it just shifts everything from what could be a product problem, right, to what is more than likely, uh, you know, or could be a product problem, right? And you're saying, hey, it's a user problem when the quality of the product that you're building could be weak, right? You could have a problem with data quality. You could have a problem with the report. Maybe the data is inaccurate, right? But if you assume that the problem is all on the user side, well, then it really kind of makes you kind of ignore some of the problems that may be inherent to the data itself.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I have lost my screen here. Are you still
Yep.
seeing me on the feed?
So I see you frozen. Do you see? There you go. Now you're back. Now you're back.
Okay. So sorry about that. I didn't fully. It looks like I may have not have fully plugged in my laptop when I got back off the plane. So that's problem number two with data literacy, is that they're assuming that the problem is tied to user skills.
Right.
Could motivate you to not even be looking at shortcomings of the product that you're building. Right. So we're big into data as a product these days in the data world. And if you really, really want to take a product driven approach, what you would say is that, hey, maybe the problem was with the product itself. Maybe my data quality is low. Maybe my usability is low. Maybe my design of this dashboard, of this interface is poor. Why don't I look there first? Instead of just saying, well, the users don't have, skills, or the users are lacking knowledge, or the users are illiterate. Maybe I should be looking at the quality of the product itself.
Makes
so
perfect
that's yeah. So that's kind of problem number two. Problem number three, and we'll wrap up on the literacy conversation here, or at least maybe solicit feedback. I'd love to hear what people have to think about this. Problem number three is a little more challenging, in that we know, study after study, research after research. I participated in research at Gartner that showed this over and over again. We know that businesses do not, and data and analytics leaders do not, measure the business impacts of data. We time and time again, we see this over and over and over. In the Forbes article that I wrote, I quoted a research study from Gartner in 2020, which said 70% of companies are not measuring the business value of data. When I was at Gartner in 2020, we had published a Magic Quadrant for MDM that said that 90% of companies aren't measuring the value of MDM. Now, that's just MDM specific, not all data, but time and time again, we see that the business has a huge problem in understanding how investments in data, improvements in data, the use of data drives business benefit, increased profit, lower costs, lower risk. So whether you say it's 70% of the time they don't, 90% of the time they don't, let's say it's better than the research suggests. Let's say it's 50% of the time, right? Let's say 50% of the time the business knows the value that data is producing for the organization. Well, if you embark on a data literacy program, and sometimes for big companies, these can be big, significant investments. If you embark on a data literacy program and you're throwing a lot of money at user training, a lot of money, maybe even focusing on the methods and techniques, which I suggest you don't do, but let's imagine that you're throwing a lot of money at a data literacy program. If you're not measuring how data impacts your business, how will you ever know that literacy program is moving the needle for you?
Yeah.
It would be like saying I'm going to do something to my car to improve the mileage of my car, right? And then having no way whatsoever to measure it.
Mm-hmm.
And some of these literacy programs for large companies, I mean, you're talking millions of dollars on user training, where there's just an assumption that you're actually going to benefit the business, that you're going to drive business value. Because again, the underlying assumption of a data literacy program is that a user skills gap is holding the organization back from realizing value in data. But we know companies don't measure it. So are you willing, as a data and analytics leader, to go throw a lot of money at a data literacy program if you are not measuring how effective that program is? So I would argue, if you are thinking about this, for one, don't focus on methods and techniques. Number two, make sure that you are confident in the quality of the products you're producing. Sit down, have one-on-ones with your users, have some workshops, bring people in and ask, hey, are you happy with the quality of the data products themselves? right?
Mhm.
Hey, are you happy with the output? Are you happy with these reports? How's the usability of the solution that we gave to you for data quality or MDM? Have those conversations first. And if you're relatively confident that your user community feels like the products that you're giving, the data products that you're providing, are fitting the need or could fit the need or are at least reasonable, that's great. Check. Number two. Number three, before you embark on this, you should have some way of measuring program effectiveness. I don't know of any other large scale program within an organization, particularly a training program, where you would go and spend a lot of money without having any idea that you were actually driving positive outcomes. So those are three things that I would say you should be probably focused on first before you start to think about spending a lot of money on data literacy. The last thing I'll finish with here, guys, data literacy, we need a better name.
like so many other things in data.
We just need a better name, like data fluency. I would even say go to market, right? Like if we're serious about becoming product driven and the integration of product management as a discipline into data management, well, then that's a go to market program, right? What you're talking about is training your users, right? And making sure that users have the resources and skills and support that they need in order to leverage your product. We could call it data fluency. We could call it go to market. We could call it end user training. But when we call it data literacy, that in and of itself creates a bit of I would say, a barrier between producers and consumers, because the flip side of literacy is illiteracy. It
Yeah,
is.
right. You
And
know, the branding of programs like this has a significant impact on their success.
yeah,
Um, and which kind of is interesting because that builds a bridge to another topic like data governance, right? I
mhm.
think about the word governance, and sometimes
Yep,
organizations have false starts and problems with that because who the heck wants to sit around and talk about rules and policies all day? And some of how you brand things. Um,
exactly.
yeah, hey, good headlines on that, Malcolm. It made it real simple for people, and I like the ending there about the business outcomes, which again people struggle with in general with data, right? How are you going to measure this? What's good look like? What's the impact? Start with the end in mind.
Yep,
Um,
totally.
cool. So let's build a bridge here to data governance for a minute, if we may.
Yeah,
Uh, I'm going to keep going back to your LinkedIn posts because I think they're fantastic and they get a ton of engagement. And looks like the community enjoys them. So, not too long ago, you published a LinkedIn post about scope creep being one of the most common failures of data governance initiatives, right?
yep.
You know, what's the saying? Your with food, your eyes are bigger than your stomach, right?
Yeah,
So you, when I read that, one of the things I think about is scope creep is caused by focusing on governance from a data first point of view rather than tying it to the business process improvement, which is your kind of
yep.
your third point in the last conversation. So let's talk about that a bit. And how do you think IT or business leaders can right size governance initiatives without getting stuck
Yep.
in the weeds of it?
It's such a good question. And just to tie off on literacy, I do see Paulo, Jeff, Charles made some comments. We'll circle back to those in the second half of the program here. But Jeff, in particular, you asked a pointed question here. I want to make sure that we do get to it, but I see it, and we'll come back to that. Just want to make sure that that you know we're not ignoring you. To the question about governance and governance scope. So if you were to look at a kind of a standard data governance framework, Gartner has one. There's a lot out there. I'll be publishing one relatively shortly, and have published many kind of framework type documents in the past related to data governance. What you'll see is there's a lot of work there. Like there's a lot of work. I mean, there's retention, archival, access, security. There's even things like ethics, right? Did you ethically source the data? There's a lot of components. There's, of course, policies, procedures. There's data quality, right? There's so many things. There's data integration. That's part of a broader governance framework. How do you connect two pieces of data together? All these things together, if you look at it and say, okay, we need data governance. A lack of data governance, a lack of data consistency, integrity, standard data quality related challenges is really holding us back, and we need some data governance. Fantastic. That's good stuff. But what I see so often is companies will, and this is just kind of how we work as IT people, and this is kind of how we work as data people. What they'll often do is, and the metaphor that I use here is they'll start at the bottom, right? Meaning what they will do as a part of that governance initiative is go and catalog everything, lineage, everything, profile everything. They'll try to build data glossaries for everything, data definitions for everything. Don't get me wrong, guys. Consultants love that approach, right?
Well,
If you got an SOW, if you're a consultant and you got an SOW that says, go solve for data governance, and where your scope is everything, that's a dream come true if you're a consultant, because that's going to be a long time coming. And when I was at Gartner, what I would see over and over and over again, it was always around 6, 7, 8 months. And maybe it's a 7-month itch or something. Maybe there's something there. I don't know. But it was always around month 6 to 8 where I would get a VP of data and analytics or a CIO or a CDO call me up and say, yeah, we're on this data governance thing. And we've been at it now about 7 months. And yeah, we've made some progress. We've got, reasonably well-defined data dictionary. We're about 3/4 of the way there. And we feel like we've found 3/4 or maybe even upwards of 80% of our data. We feel like we found it, but there's still some pockets out there that have kind of like the Wild West we don't know about. And we've glossaried a lot. And we've bought some tools that have kind of helped with some of this, and particularly in discovery, but we're still working on it, man. And it's expensive, right? Because not only are we doing all of the kind of the data discovery, but we're also doing the process discovery too. So we're trying to figure out how all this data gets used around the organization, and we're trying to figure out like where dashboards are used and where they're not used. So all of this stuff. And then that leader would say to me, but we haven't shown any value, and the senior executives are getting really impatient. And we've got a new budget cycle coming up, and I'm not entirely sure that I can justify this. And I'm concerned. We spent a lot of money on tools. We bought this awesome governance tool, and we bought this awesome kind of cataloging and profiling tool. Sometimes they're one and the same. And we spend a lot of money on this stuff. And my CEO wants a report on to understand, what problems are we solving? Because everything I just described is not solving a business problem. Right? Everything I just described is an inventory or a profile or a discovery process. It's not solving a business problem, right? Because a data glossary in and of itself doesn't solve anything. And a data dictionary in and of itself doesn't necessarily solve anything, right? So that kind of taught me that, like, hey, starting at the bottom and doing this bottoms up where you try to inventory everything and glossary everything, there's got to be a different way. There's got to be a better way here. So what I argue, and what I've argued for a long time, is to instead start at the top, meaning start with a problem, right? Go talk to a senior leader in your organization about what his or her problems are on a daily basis. What are the things that are holding, what are the data related things or data related challenges that are holding that business leader back, right? Even asking very pointed questions like, what do you think is the difference between hitting your bonus this year and not hitting your bonus this year? And how is data playing into that? How do you think the data may be holding you back from hitting your bonus? And if you go have these conversations around the organization, I'd be willing to bet you get some data or some business leaders who will be willing to say, well, you know what? And maybe, for example, your chief revenue officer, whoever's running your sales organization, maybe she or he would say, well, I've got a target around net new logos, or I've got a target for cross-sell and upsell, right? I've got a 20% target to drive additional sales within our existing customer base. And I'm having a real hard time there because we don't have a single version of truth for our customer, right?
Mm-hmm.
It takes me 20 minutes, or it takes me 2 weeks. I've heard 2 weeks. I've actually seen 2 weeks to pull a full report on customer sales across the organization because we're so incredibly siloed, for example.
Mm-hmm.
That's a real problem that you can put a fence around. How to improve your data to drive cross sales. It's very specific, it's measurable, and you can put a fence around that from a governance perspective. So what I would argue, and I've seen it work over and over again, this is not an academic exercise because it's worked for me, which is start with a business problem. Use that as your North Star. Be razor focused on solving that problem, and then drill down and work down and understand, okay, what data is necessary to understand cross-sell opportunities? Well, maybe some contract data, maybe some customer data, but it's not going to be all data. It's not going to be everything. And if you establish some guardrails for a governance program, you can limit your scope, right? You don't have to solve for all aspects of that data governance framework that I was talking about. You don't have to inventory everything. You don't have to glossary everything. You just need to know how to solve that very one specific problem. And you can embark on defining governance policies and procedures that support solving that problem. That is a time, that could be a time bound, that could certainly be a scope bound enterprise where you'll know if you actually succeeded or not. So that's what I mean by kind of taking a top down approach. Ultimately, there will be some bottom up and you'll meet in some kind of happy middle here. But the best way to limit the scope of a data governance initiative is to have an end in mind, is to have a business outcome that you can measure in mind, and working with those stakeholders and being razor focused on that.
Yep. Yeah. It starts with a listening tour, right?
Yeah. Well, listening tour, that wonderful. That sounds great.
Yeah, absolutely. Paulo here, who's joined us today, I'm going to go back to what he mentioned. He talked about data governance. It's all about starting small, but having the near full vision. So, Malcolm, if you could just quickly, in the spirit of starting small, what about MVP? What's an MVP for data governance? We think about scope creep, right? Hit on that for just a second.
Yeah, MVP. I mean, for most people know this, but minimum viable product, right? It's an agile centric term that says what's the minimum that we have to do to be able to drive value, right?
Yep.
An MVP in the data world would be the minimum that we have to do to drive value or help solve for a business outcome, right? Yep. So the example that I gave before is cross sell, right? And this is a good one, right? So you have a customer. You think that there's opportunity for that customer to be buying more of your products, right? And often for a lot of companies, that means you may be buying from department A or division A or product A, but you're not buying from some other department or division. Okay. What would be the MVP needed to help solve that problem? I would argue that the MVP for that would simply be some form of I will loosely say 360. It's probably not even a 360. Probably you'll get away with a 280 or maybe even a 180, right? Right? Like what is the minimum that you need to solve for? And the minimum you need to deliver to solve for that? What I would say is that you need some sort of a customer 360 that shows sales by product line, by department or division, right? You're probably going to need to pull data out of an ERP system, assuming that's where you're recognizing revenue or that's where contracts are managed and maintained. You'll probably have to pull some data out of a CRM system and maybe even multiple CRM systems, assuming that you have them. But again, that could be an MVP. And all you would need to do to solve that is a report. I would argue is a report that you could put in front of a salesperson that says, hey, customer A is buying from department A, but they're not buying from department B. So a salesperson can go pick up the phone or send an email or whatever it is and say, hey, listen, I noticed you weren't buying product B, right? Did that require a lot of heavy lifting around data integration? A little bit, but I would argue you could even just be pulling files to get that data, right? Do you need to solve for a deep integration between your CRM system and your ERP systems? Well, no, not part of the MVP. Do you need to implement a brand new BI or an analytics layer to do this? Well, probably not. You could do this on top of whatever reporting tool you're already using. Are you going to have to go and buy an expensive data management solution? Maybe eventually, but maybe not at the beginning, right? You're going to need to solve for a few things. You're going to need to solve for some matching, right? Across lines of business, assuming that maybe you're B2B. One system says Acme, the other one says Acme Inc. or Acme Co. Starts to look a little bit like MDM, right? You're going to need to have some sort of solution to solve for that. You're going to have to implement some basic data quality rules, probably some basic data definitions. You'll have to layer in some analytics. If you can get to 60 or 70 or 80% of a solution there, you could help solve that problem. Because nobody's expecting 100%, particularly if you put that report in front of a sales leader, they go sell on it and they go make money on it. They're not going to be talking about the 3 or 4 or 5 records that are still low quality. They're not going to be complaining that you didn't fix for the data quality problems in the source systems, because an MVP in that case wouldn't require it. You don't need to go clean up any data, by the way, as a part of this MVP I'm describing. Don't do it. That's a rabbit hole that you'll spend months and months and months and months and months on a data cleanup, where to solve the problem that I was talking about, cross-sell in this case, you don't need to fix any data. Probably, ultimately, You'll want to. You'll want to. I know this sounds heretical. Like I'm a data guy saying don't clean your data, but you don't need to as a part of an MVP. If your MVP is a 360 of something or a 280 of something, I would argue that all you need to do is find a way to link everything together, and you don't need to solve for data quality. So these are things that I used to see this all the time, where companies would assume, okay, well, data quality is our problem because we have multiple duplicate records. Yeah, you do. But as a part of an MVP, do you have to fix it? No, you don't. Especially if the outcomes that you are supporting can be solved with better analytics, right? Ultimately, maybe you need to solve for operational uses of data. Maybe you need to solve for maybe how you onboard new customers, or maybe your credit check process, or maybe some of your product related processes and your materials management related processes. Maybe you do need to solve for some broken business processes. Maybe you need to have detailed and deep integrations between applications and on and on. You'll get there. But if you're able to solve that problem through an MVP approach, if you're able to do it, and if you're able to drive revenue, in this case, sometimes it's cost savings, but in this case, it's revenue. I would always recommend focusing on revenue first. If you can do it, you're going to be a rock star. Yep. And your business users will be like, oh man, I had no idea. This is fantastic. Can I get some more? Instead of saying, hey man, this guy's, or this data and analytics leader is making me fill out these required fields, and they've asked me to spend 20% of my time over the next 3 months doing a data cleanup, and I don't get it. I don't see it. This is like, that's the old way. Don't do that. New way. Focus on MVP. Solve for problems. Excite your customers. They'll want to invest more in your program.
There it is. Pretty simple. All right. So 360 degree kind of builds a bridge into SSOT, single source of truth.
Oh yeah.
Last time we did CDO Matters Live, which was January, we do these once a month. You had published an episode of the podcast highlighting a conversation with Jeff Jonas about the notion of the single source of truth, kind of RIP, right?
Yeah.
And is this still relevant today, right? And can we even take a step back, that despite its relevance? And what do people mean when they say that? Because when I hear customers talk about it, it's like asking, everybody has a different definition for data literacy. It's the same thing for SSOT. So let's talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, the depending on who you ask, the dreaded or beloved single source of truth, or even take it one step further, the single version of the truth. And I think it's important to draw a distinction between those two things, right? Single source and single version. Okay. Let's take a trip in the time machine, shall we? And go back about 20 years, give or take, when this wasn't as gray as it is. Where there was these systems called Siebel systems. Well, it's a software vendor, Siebel, and there was the kind of the emergence and growth of large scale enterprise class ERP systems, which I would argue at the time was really kind of the first kind of end to end business process automation, software driven, single kind of stack. Using a phrase we like to use in the tech world, the single stack that solved all of those problems. Right, it solved for procurement. It optimized manufacturing-related problems. It helped, better manage customer relationships. It was the place where the finance people could go and recognize their revenue and manage their GLs. And those GLs were tied to cost centers and cost codes that were deeply integrated into manufacturing processes and deeply integrated to sales processes. So the finance folks had this end-to-end management layer, this end-to-end application that was solving for some really hard things. Those are all good things. Don't get me wrong. But what happened is that was really kind of the genesis of this idea of a single source of truth, one place to get information about your customers, your assets, your employees, your locations, your materials, you name it. That there was a generation of software people, including yours truly, who were kind of born, or at least raised, I should say, probably not born, but at least kind of raised under this idea that the most efficient way to manage data was through this hub and spoke architecture, where the one hub at that time was the ERP system, and all of the other applications within the organization just kind of hung off of that, but deferred to the ERP as the single source of truth for all those things that I was talking about, largely because the CFO said you had to. Yeah. Right? Because it was all keyed off the GL, and it was all keyed off account codes of the GL, and the CFO was saying, you got to use this because if you don't, it's going to break RevRec, and our financials that we report to the street are going to be wrong, and that's a really bad thing. And you must defer to this as the single source of truth for enterprises and organizations. Well, along comes Salesforce.com in the, believe it or not, the early 90s, folks. This is also how old I am. I was involved in some of the earliest implementations of Salesforce.com. Along comes Salesforce.com. Along comes the cloud. Along comes what we broadly call the democratization of IT. And what happened was that as a reaction to those big, monolithic, giant single software stacks that weren't fast, weren't configurable, took forever and ever to adapt to business processes, people, particularly in sales and marketing, said, you know what, this Siebel's not moving as fast as we need to, or whatever ERP platform, doesn't matter. It's not moving the speed of business. We need to go faster, and we need more flexibility. So we're going to go build our own thing for CRM. We're going to go build our own thing for procurement and cost management. We're going to go, and this happened all over the organization, but Salesforce is really kind of the one that, that broke the dam, as it were. And all of a sudden, you had all of these multiple competing versions of truth, right? And I would argue that those were there by design and necessary, because ultimately truth is about context. What's true to the CFO may not necessarily be true to the CMO or to the CIO or to the chief people officer. It doesn't matter. Truth is relative and bound by context. What is good data to a marketer is very different than what's good data to a finance person. So that single version of the truth, or the single source of the truth, was really not optimal for the business. And the business naturally got to where it needs to be, which is all of these different sources of enterprise data that are all very context driven, or use case driven, or application data driven. And that's great, because they need to be, because that's optimized for speed. But you've got all these multiple things all around. The problem with having multiple customer tables, we'll just pick on customer because it's an easy one. Of having multiple sources of customer data, the problem with that is that customer is inherently a cross-functional domain. Customer data is used everywhere, right? It's used by marketing, it's used by finance, it's used in even procurement, I would argue, when trying to understand a balance of trade between a supplier and a customer. So this data is used everywhere. It's used cross-functionally within an organization. And the minute you start looking at data that is cross-functional, you need to find a way to link those things together. So is a single source of truth kind of dead? I don't know. Is a single version of the truth dead? Yes, it is, because we've learned that's most efficient, right? There are multiple versions of the truth that can all coexist happily. However, within every context, whether that's a sales context or a finance context or a manufacturing context, within every context, there is a single version of the truth within that context. So truth is context bound. Enterprise-wide is a context, right? If your CEO asks, how many customers do we have? There can only be one answer. If your CFO asks, how many customers do we have? There can only be one answer. So within every context, at a functional level and a cross-functional level, there is a single version of the truth. Where we've come from was one version to rule them all, that everybody had to use, like it or not, to where we are now, that there are multiple versions of the truth. However, at a cross-functional level, that is an enterprise-wide view. So it's a bit of a tricky answer to the question. Is there a single version of the truth? No, there really isn't. There's multiple versions, but within every version, or within every context, I should say, there is still only one version of the truth. Now, when it comes to a source, I would argue, just from an architectural perspective, there is goodness in having one place to go to get this data. Now, I can hear people out there already saying, oh, well, the data mesh is solved for this, or the data fabric has solved for this. No, they haven't. they have not. Both solve cross-functional use cases in a highly academic way. And I would argue I have yet to see in a large-scale organization a fully productized, a fully operationalized implementation of what the data mesh would call federated computational governance, to allow for centralized management of data at higher levels of the organization and centralized governance of data at higher levels of the organization. What most companies are focused on and fixated on from a data mesh perspective is domain centricity. And that's fine. That's great. But again, if your CEO asks you how many customers do you have, Sorry, folks, only one answer, and you got to be able to answer it quickly, right? Data mesh hasn't figured it out. I would argue, well, it's not argue. I think that's largely what Zamak is kind of focused on now with her startup, is trying to fix some of these things and create what she calls a data mesh operating system to help address some of these issues. The data fabric certainly has not solved this. This is just a hand wave in data fabric. It is this magic semantic layer that combines integration, data governance, heavy doses of semantics to solve for cross-functional use cases in governance and management of data. Doesn't exist. It doesn't. Yeah. So if you think it does, I'd love to hear your comments, but there is still a need for some idea of what I would argue is a central source of truth, right? Whether that's a governance hub, an MDM hub, because there's architectural benefits to that. Because if you try to spider web this, right, where you've got, I mean, this is why hubs exist in the first place. This is why integration hubs exist. This is why MDM hubs, data quality hubs exist, because architecturally trying to spider web this together is going to be a nightmare. Now, again, maybe there's some advances in data virtualization and highly advanced forms of semantic layers that can help solve for this, maybe, but I've yet to see anything that solves for both highly decentralized and centralized at the same time. Yet to see it.
Yeah. The whole version versus source is an important distinguishment to make when you're talking about the concept. And clarity around the concept is important.
Yeah.
All right. Go ahead.
I do want to get to that question that Jeff had asked earlier in the chat. He said, you mentioned the measuring component can be challenging. And what I was speaking of was measuring the value of data. What are some of the techniques used to accomplish this? It's a great question, Jeff. And it is, I would argue, solving and answering that question is the number one biggest hurdle that most data and analytics leaders fail to get over, which is finding a way to link, I will say, improvements in data to the delivery of business outcomes and to the delivery of business value. Ultimately, what you're talking about here is building a model, right? And in the case I was giving before, the example I was giving before, cross-selling, right? If you deliver, let's say, a sales qualified lead, what we in the marketing world would call a sales qualified lead. If you were able to dedupe data and understand with relative confidence exactly how many customers you had and how many products each of those customers owned, right? If you were able to deliver those insights and you were able to say to a salesperson, hey, you know what? I was able to highlight a situation where company A is not buying product B. They're buying product A, but they're not buying product B. And you didn't know that before because we had duplicate data or we had different versions of that customer record that made it impossible to understand the depth of the relationship we had with that customer. If you were able to do that, if you were able to say, hey, look over here, go have a customer with this talk, man, go have a talk with this customer about a cross-sell opportunity, what would that be worth to your sales organization? They will know the answer to that. There isn't a salesperson or a marketer out there who wouldn't know the answer to how much money would it be worth to the organization to have a highly qualified lead.
Oh yeah,
that's a modeling exercise, right?
Yes.
I solved the data problem. I delivered a high quality lead, and we believe that will yield in X dollars of revenue because, again, every marketer out there will know one qualified lead on average could lead to X revenue or Y revenue. So, Jeff, that's the answer to the question. That's just one use case and one very, very specific use case, but it's making those connections. Ultimately, what we're talking about here is a modeling exercise. Sometimes you will have to guess. The key here is working with the right folks on the business side to build those models. Right? Finding the 2 or 3 people that are always involved in budgeting and forecasting and planning. The 2 or 3 people that are probably doing the bulk of the Excel lifting, and yes, I said Excel, within a lot of organizations when it comes to budgeting, planning, or forecasting. Find those 2 people, sit down with them and have a conversation about, hey, if we made this data better about our suppliers or about our raw materials, could we make an estimate of how that would improve downstream process A or downstream process B? We could do that. And if we did that, what would that yield from a risk mitigation perspective, cost reduction, or revenue generation perspective? If you build those models out, that's what you present to senior leaders to justify investments in governance or MDM or any other data management program. Because the first thing that those leaders will say is, oh, these numbers look great. Where'd they come from? Well, I worked with your people on your team to build them. Oh, Okay. So I know it's a really high level answer question here, Jeff, but it is absolutely positively doable. And I've got a lot of content. We've got content on prophecy.com. We've got content even out on YouTube that helps speak to some of these things. And we'll happily connect offline if we want to go into more depth as well.
Yep. Jeff says, I like the approach.
Cool.
And just a word of caution to people about building models. It doesn't have to be perfect. There's this thing about modeling that every model is wrong because it's based off of assumptions. So don't get spun around the axle on having a perfect model as you go to do these things. It does not have to be perfect. It has to be directionally there, and working with the people, like you said, Malcolm will definitely get it in the right direction if you're involving the right stakeholders, right?
Yep.
So, all right. So we're 10 minutes left here, roughly. So we can jump to another topic, or we can ask the crowd here. Does anybody want to come on and ask any of their burning questions, whether it's in chat, whether it's here on video? Malcolm, how do you want to drive?
I do see a question from Anne. Maybe the question is that ICT is not very literate in data, hence the bad quality of data. ICT?
It may be IT. I wonder if it's IT.
Oh, could be. Yeah. Well, if you're an IT organization and you're charged with running a data and analytics program and you're not very literate in data, that's a problem. I would argue really the literacy on the IT side needs to be business literacy, right? Like Reed mentioned earlier, like to go on an interview tour, right? Understand how business users are leveraging your data, understand how they take that data and make decisions, or how they take that data you're providing and optimize business processes or sell stuff or build stuff. Understand deeply how data is used to fuel the operations of the business. I would argue if you do that, if IT people were more business literate, I would argue the idea of data literacy really kind of largely goes away. Not entirely, but largely. If we knew how businesses were using, or business users used our data, we'd make better products. And they would be using them more because we would know how our data would be used. We would know how our products would be used. We would know how our data is driving business decisions day in and day out. So, and I think I'm kind of paraphrasing you, but I think kind of turning things around from your question. Yeah, IT users that aren't very data literate, that's a bit of a problem. But I would argue the better thing to be is more business literate. Yeah. But getting back to Reed's question, if there's anybody that wants to ask a question or come on stage, let me know.
Yeah. So a gentleman by the name of George here, Malcolm, he's asking, are there tools evolving around real-time AI for observability, profiling, and data discovery? A technology question.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Most certainly. The short answer is yes, but again, beware, right? Don't profile for profiling's sake and don't discover for discovery's sake, right? Have an end goal in mind. Why are you trying to profile your data? Well, we need to know where it is. Well, that's not a very compelling business outcome, right? A better answer to that question is we have a concern of extremely low data quality, and we believe that improving our data quality 10% can drive a 5% reduction in our cost of goods sold. Right? That's the level of specificity we're trying to get to here, guys, right? And if you said, hey, our cost of goods are really, really high, because we've got inventories of products sitting around, or inventories of materials sitting around, and we know that when they sit around, they're not used. That drives up the cost because we've got a holding cost associated with that. We think a problem with that is because we've got kind of really low quality of our materials data or suppliers data, and we got a theory, a model that fixing that will help address our cost of goods sold. Well, job number one for that is, setting aside some governance policies, talking about what the outcomes are going to be, build a business case that is based on the modeling that we're talking about. Then you would want to go and kind of discover that data. You'd want to go profile that data. You'd want to understand what your baseline data quality is for your materials data or your supplier data. Again, this is what I mean by putting kind of fence posts around a governance or profiling or a discovery initiative. Don't go to discover just for discovering's sake. Go with a specific goal in mind. There are great tools out there. Prophecy's got a partnership with Elation. I've worked with a lot of companies that are using Calibra. There's a lot of new tools in this space that are kind of focused on observability. I don't happen to think observability is anything new. Just it's AI and ML and a bunch of process automation on top of what we've always done, right?
Yep.
Which is capture deep log data, capture insights on data, capture a lot of metadata, data about data. Where is data being used, where it's not being used, where is it kind of falling out of the data pipeline? Yeah, I guess you could say, well, observability is really hyper automation in that, and kind of new tools layered into what we've always done from a data capture perspective. All right, fine. I think that kind of observability is a bit of a hype phrase these days. Not entirely sure how it's materially different than the things that we've always done, other than it's faster and it's more automated because of the AI ML. Either way, ton of tools out there, George. I would recommend as well checking out some posts from a dear friend of mine, Sanjeev Mohan, Mohan. He's also an ex-Gartner analyst. Sanjeev knows the data observability space really, really well. And I trust him implicitly. So he's another voice like mine out there. I kind of focus on the MDM and governance side of the house. Sanjeev really focuses on data observability, and he's an expert.
He says, fantastic. Awesome. Thank you. So I've got 4 minutes left, or 3 minutes. And Malcolm, let me just try this. I don't see any other questions, so I'm going to go here. In 2 minutes or less, tell me, is master data management dead? 2 minutes or less.
No.
Done.
Well, again, it's so funny because every time, and I'm kind of I'm the old salty guy that's been around the block, right? Sitting in the back of the meeting room, like, seen this before. But I have seen it before. And every time there's some new flashy new thing like a data mesh or a data fabric or data observability or whatever, where there is some promise to make things bigger, faster, stronger, easier. I saw this with Hadoop. Let's just go, deploy some HDFS clusters and we will solve world hunger. Everything will be fine. Oh yeah, and we can even do MDM in our data warehouse now because we've got all the data in one place. No. MDM is not going anywhere. It's not dead. And the reason why is because organizations are both organized and operate at very functional levels, but they also must operate efficiently at cross-functional levels. The minute you need to go above a domain and into a cross-functional domain where that data is being used across the organization by multiple workflows, multiple applications, multiple user groups, you need to have some way of enforcing a common set of data standards, data quality rules, data governance policies. That's MDM all day long. And as long as we were operating cross-functional, it's not going away.
You could say, so instead of the minute you need to go past a domain, the minute you need to solve a problem that involves more than one domain.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. And again, I haven't seen mad props to Zamak and everything that she's done in the data mesh world. It's great stuff. I'm a believer. I'm a supporter of the data mesh. I'm a supporter of kind of domain centricity. I'm most certainly a supporter of data or product management integrated to data management. But I would argue the data mesh is really kind of not solved for cross-functional use cases of data, at least not in large scale kind of production class environments. I haven't seen it. Certainly haven't seen it in data fabric. Data fabric is easily 5 years behind. At least where the hype. At least I haven't seen it from a data fabric perspective. SC, thanks for putting the LinkedIn link there. Yeah, that is Sanjeev. Super smart guy who knows data observability like the back of his hand. But MDM's not dead, not going anywhere. It's changing. It's adapting. That may be a great topic for the next CDO Matters, to talk about how MDM is adapting and how MDM is evolving and changing, because it most certainly is, right? MDM is evolving to support the context centricity of data. MDM is evolving to these more adaptive models where you can have multiple customer models, or maybe you could even use the model of your customer data from a specific source, where you could have multiple models all coexisting at the same time, right? Days were MDM, you got to do it our way. You got to implement this model, and there's one model, and that's it. Where we're going in the future is more of an adaptive place where these models can coexist together at the same time to support that kind of context centricity that I was talking about. So maybe a great topic for the next CDO Matters. We can talk about how MDM is evolving, because it most certainly is. Paulo comment on data mesh, but I think it's still too theoretical. Totally agree with you, Paulo. It's right now still too theoretical. Same with the data fabric. So that's it, guys. We got a minute. We can end off here. I think this has been a blast. Reed, thank you.
Yeah. Awesome. Love it.
Thank you. Everybody, thank you for tuning into another episode of CDO Matters Live. Don't forget, we have the CDO Matters podcast. It's available on your podcast vendor of choice, Google, Spotify, Apple. We're up to our 18th episode now, I think, or very close to our 18th episode. Love to get your feedback on that. Please go subscribe to CDO Matters, the podcast version. We do this every month. If you've got questions, come meet us. Yeah, it's typically, what is it, the third Friday of the month, yeah, to do this. And I love seeing you guys all here. Thanks for tuning in. Hope to see you again in another edition of CDO Matters Live very, very soon.
Ciao.
Thanks all.